Now, before we start, I actually have a bit of a confession to make. It feels a little bit weird standing up here on stage today talking about Node and Microsoft because, well, I haven't ever really been the biggest fan of JavaScript. So, no, don't get me wrong. I mean, I like JavaScript. It's really fun and all. It's just that I never really considered using it in, I don't know, say, production. So you can imagine my surprise when I saw everyone jumping on the Node bandwagon, ranging from startups to large-scale enterprises. And I just didn't get it. But now, I think 2 years later, I think I finally understand. And so I want to share that with you all, that aha moment with you all today. So when we're building an application, it's more than just about optimizing for speed or just productivity or just flexibility. It's about striking a good balance between the three of those. And I think Node does a really great job of that. So from the speed front, right, it's not the fastest, but it's super fast, right? It has a lightweight and optimized core, so you only have to use the functions that you actually want to be using. It's asynchronous and non-blocking by default, and it's built on Chrome's V8 engine, which is the fastest JavaScript engine at the time, right? Also, because of the absolutely incredible and vibrant ecosystem, a little bit of code goes a long way because you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And then lastly, you can develop how you want. Right? Your application is going to evolve over time, and it's going to need different things at different points in time. You want a technology stack that's actually going to support you there. And Node does just that. So whether you want to be developing a monolithic application or whether you want to start scaling and using microservices, Node's got you covered. Or whether you want to be using dynamic typing or static typing with tools like TypeScript, you have that option at your disposal. And so that balance is really what was most exciting about Node for me. But then the question is, why does Microsoft care about Node? Why is Microsoft excited about Node? And this might be difficult to hear. There's really no good way to say this, but it's not us, it's you. You're building all of these absolutely incredible applications. You're building up this absolutely incredible community. And we want to support you in that. But undoubtedly, whenever I say this, the skeptics come out, and the response goes something like this. Hey, Microsoft, if Node is so important to you, why don't you fix blank? And typically, one of three things follows. You could probably guess the first one, max path. So for the uninitiated, some time ago, we decided that 260 characters was a reasonable file path length limitation. And turns out we were wrong, and we're sorry for that. And so what would happen is that you'd install an NPM module, and because of the way that it nests dependencies, the file path length would get greater and greater the greater the dependency chain, the longer the dependency chain got. But luckily, there's been some progress in that area. So first, NPM v3 was released, and that installs paths as maximally flat by default. And that has taken care of a lot of the issues that people have had with Node. And then at the same time, what we're doing is we're actually working on a lot of different platform improvements. So in .NET Core now supports long file paths. So that's a huge improvement there. And then we're also chatting with the Windows team as well to see what is it that we can do in that space. Now, in those cases, right, when it comes to platform improvements, it depends on how long it takes for those improvements to actually percolate through the ecosystem. But at least there's been progress, and it's really good to see. So the next one is, how many people here remember this thread? Because I do. So the title of the thread is it's pretty broad. And the problem with broad threads. At least in this case, what happened was it sort of just turned into a thread for everyone who was generally unhappy and happened to be on Windows. But the core of the issue is this. Native modules are confusing. So native modules are when you're using a bunch of C++ with your JavaScript, and then you might start seeing all these cryptic compiler errors, and that's confusing because you're a JavaScript developer, so what is this? And that's an issue with just every platform, so not just Windows. But the thing with Windows was that it also happened to be kind of difficult and painful to actually configure your environment. So people weren't really sure whether it was an issue with like the module that they were using or whether it was an issue with their configuration. And it turns out that people don't actually enjoy downloading 8 GB worth of full-blown Visual Studio in order to npm install some native module. So people weren't very happy, and so we tried to take care of that. So recently, we've released the Visual C++ build tools, which are actually a minimal set of the required dependencies in order to compile native modules. So that's just the compiler and the Windows SDKs. But that wasn't enough, right? So we wanted to make this as easy as possible for you to configure. And so we also introduced the ability to actually npm install the build tools straight from your command line. So that hopefully that solves a lot of the pains that people were running into, and the thread is now closed. So the last piece is the Windows CLI. We get a lot of complaints about this, and we reached out to the community to try and figure out, hey, what is it that you all want? And it turns out that really what people wanted was just Bash on Windows. So we went ahead and did that too. This is with the Windows subsystem for Linux preview. You can actually go and actually use Bash on Windows. And so those were the top 3 frustrations and complaints that, on every Reddit thread, anytime we do any release, would always bubble up to the top. So I just wanted to get all of that. Now that that's all out of the way, I hope you'll believe me when I say that we want you to be as productive as possible with Node. And so I'm going to show you some of the different tools that we've actually built in order to help with that. In particular, I'm going to focus on how we've actually brought some of the magic of Visual Studio to the Node ecosystem. Marketing does not like this slide. They don't like when you modify brands and stuff. And so, in particular, we have 2 different offerings. We have Visual Studio Code, which is a free cross-platform and open-source editor that provides you with code completions, debugging, and much more. And then also, if you're a Visual Studio fan and you're familiar with that environment, we have support for you there too. But today, I'm going to be downloading Visual Studio or going to be demoing Visual Studio Code. And in particular, I'm going to be demoing a Twitter bot, because as building developer tools means you get to build a lot of ridiculous applications, and this is today's ridiculous application. In particular, I get sometimes nervous when I'm up on stage, and so I wanted to make a Twitter bot that would comfort me, and just say nice things to me as the talk went on. So let's go ahead and switch to the demo. So here we are in the application. And the first thing, actually, that we need to do, this is vitally important, is we need to comment out the sentience, because we cannot have this bot going rogue. That would not be good. And so basically what it does, as I mentioned, is every time I'll tweet, it'll tweet back some inspirational quote, or tweet, nice tweet, or dream big, right? And so that's, really inspiring. And additionally, so I emailed our CEO the other day, Satya, and I asked him if I could get unconditional access to his Twitter account. He didn't really reply. So we're just going to go for the next best thing. And with every tweet, there's going to be a Satya bobblehead attached to that. And I have actually the code to generate the bobbleheads later on, if you're interested. So, and then the other thing that we need to do is, this is the test account, but I'm going to use my actual Twitter handle, because when I test things, I like to test them in production. And what we're going to do is, actually, before we do any of that, I just wanted to show you a few key features of the editor that in the environment that help you actually write your code, right? So right here, we see that we're actually requiring the FS module, and we can dot in and see that we're getting code completions for it. We'll get code completions for Node or any of the most popular NPM packages. And those are provided by these typings files over here. So there's a whole ecosystem around this. And so if you were to require Express and then download the Express typings, you'd be able to get completions. And we also have some really powerful navigation, right? So if I have this on tweet function over here, so every time I tweet, then it's going to call that. I can take a look, Shift F12, view all of the different references in line. Now the screen ratio is a little weird here, but you can jump in between that, and I can F12 and jump around and navigate throughout my code. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and start running the application. So it's already configured so that if I hit F5, it's just going to start the application. And what we're going to do is throw this tweet out there, because I do love this community. And let's see. So in theory, I'll get some actual tweet over here. And it's actually a little bit embarrassing, because this wasn't supposed to work. I was supposed to show it not working so we could actually debug it. But I guess that's the issue with demos sometimes. So I'll show you debugging anyways. Let's say we wanted to understand exactly how it was that this was all. Let's actually debug what the bug was supposed to be over here. And so we'd go and we could set a breakpoint on this right when we're getting the status. We could press F5 again, and then go into Twitter. We'll run in and then say, my tweet, very creative, right? Node interactive, because that's where we are. And I'll spell that right. And we're going to go ahead and tweet. And then we should hopefully hit this breakpoint. Might take some time. I don't actually see. OK, so, there we go. OK, it just took a little while longer. I guess the internet was being a little bit flaky. So we can go ahead, we can step in. You have all of the different, you can look at the call stack and jump in between that. We can keep stepping over and then eventually step out of the application. We can see here that the index was actually 5.16. And so what had been missing was this math.floor over here. And when we go ahead and add that, then it would have gone. It worked as we saw. So one of the things that when we're designing, I guess this Visual Studio Code that we wanted to make sure is that we don't want to limit you or restrict you in any way. And part of that means making it super, super customizable for all the different workflows that people are using. So for instance, let's say you had a gulp task or grunt task that you wanted to run every time you set up your debugger. You could actually configure a task runner, and we have a bunch of different preset configurations for you, or you can customize something yourself. And the other thing that is pretty cool is if you use, a lot of people use NodeMon to restart their process, and every time that you edit the code, it'll watch all the files and then restart. And so what you can do is actually, if you include this restart property in the debug configuration, then the debugger will automatically reattach every single time that the process terminates. And so that makes it really useful for just iterating more quickly on your code. So with that, let's head back to the slides, and let's talk about the space-time continuum. So, time travel debugging. What happens if whatever issue that you ran into actually happens in production, right? You can't necessarily reproduce it locally. It's easy enough to set a breakpoint when it's on your local machine, but not when you have all these services going around and things are things are just not reproducible. And so one of the things that we've actually been looking into lately is how would, if you're debugging something that's in production, then what you really want is to understand the running state of your application at that point in time. And so right now I'm going to also start the exact same process again. But this time I'm going to start Node Chakra rather than the Node V8. And basically all this is we flipped out V8, we introduced Chakra. This is with all the discussions about VM neutrality that you might have heard of. And Chakra is actually instrumented in such a way that you can actually record and check, that you can actually checkpoint the node process as it's going along. And then we can deterministically replay it after everything has been checkpointed. And so we're going to go ahead and throw this tweet out there, back to the breakpoint. And so now it's gone ahead, and I should have received a response back. And yeah, you got it. Thanks, Satya. And we can go back to Visual Studio Code. Now, one of the things you'll notice is there's actually a folder here, TTD, that includes all of the different checkpoints that have now been, all the different checkpoints of that running process. And now when we start debugging, and in this case it's actually using a different debug configuration. Now when we start debugging, so we can press F5, it's actually going to attach to the actual, or the previously, to the checkpoint version. And so what we can do is now you'll notice that in addition to just a step over button, there's also a step back button. And so you can actually go back to any point in time in your code. The first time takes a little bit because it's actually replaying everything, but then afterwards it's actually pretty fast. And then now we can start stepping in and going over. And this is something where we use math.random, and so this is something that we wouldn't have been able to reproduce otherwise, but we're actually going to see that we have the exact same like index and status, right? So we're seeing that the same status that had been produced was you got it. And so we can continue. And that provides just an easier way to actually inspect your code. Now this is still in its very, very early stages. But hopefully in the future, this will actually help diagnose a lot of those issues that you might run into. Now, one of the key things that I just wanted to mention here is that time travel debugging isn't a new idea. It's actually been around for, or there's been research on the topic for 20, 25 years or so. But the key innovation here is really just how performant this solution is. And so if you notice, it was actually fairly quick that we could actually checkpoint the process and replay it. And what we've seen is it's only been about like a 20% overhead, in some cases even less. And the way that happens is that we've actually instrumented the runtime and are taking advantage of things that the runtime is doing in order to know what are the optimal times to checkpoint the process, because then we can reduce the state. So for instance, if we know that we've just performed a garbage collection, we know that now the state is at this minimal point, and now is probably a pretty good time to take a checkpoint. And so there are a bunch of different optimizations like that, and I'm happy to actually point you to the full research paper or chat about it afterwards if you're interested. But it is really, really neat. And so with that, I promised you that we would have you could go and see how to make the bobblehead generating application. And so it's a nice little tutorial that you can run through. And we also have a bunch of really great resources for you. So the first is we have this Node.js guidelines repo, where we've just been putting a bunch of informal notes about some of the issues that, one of the things is about working in developer tools is that you see a very interesting perspective on the world. Mainly, you get to hear about everyone's problems. And so eventually you get tired of that. And then, so we just tried to put that all in one place so we didn't have to keep rehashing things. And then the other piece is I really encourage you to go and download Visual Studio Code and download the time travel debugging preview. We'd really, really love to hear your feedback, especially if it happens to come in the form of a pull request. Thank you.